I mean, you talk about rivalry in your piece on the Athletic. You kind of talk about it being one-sided, really, because of Germany's success puts them on a very different page to England. Who who would the Germans consider their biggest rivals?
Well, I get a sense that the England-Germany thing might be changing, actually, might become more of a rivalry because of the impact of the Premier League, but maybe we can get into this in a second. Certainly right now, the biggest game that could be would be Germany-Italy. Italy are seen as our biggest rivals in terms of success in big competitions. They are, multiple World Cup winners. They're always competitive. Well, always or almost always competitive. And that is a history that's been built, a history of rivalry that's been built up over decades, and is also further enhanced by the proximity between these countries. Germans love to go on holiday in Italy. There's 500,000 Italians in Germany, working, living there. The two countries have a sort of complex relationship. There's a saying in Italy which is really apt that says that the Germans love the Italians but don't respect them. The Italians respect the Germans, don't love them. So it's a very complicated kind of relationship, and football bleeds into that. And on a similar level, although perhaps slightly less pronounced, it's with the Dutch. Again, a nation that is very close. We have a border with them. We perceive them in a certain way that might or might not be accurate. They, I think, perceive us in very similar ways. The accusation is that either side is very arrogant and big-headed. And of course, there's been footballing differences, and in 1974, Germany as the villain of the piece, kind of preventing this one lovely Dutch team from getting their just rewards at the World Cup. There's all these issues that are just much bigger than England, Germany. And as you said in the beginning, I think for a rivalry to really emerge, that one that is mutually felt, you need to have either some kind of huge sort of dislike on some level, which just doesn't exist with England. Germans, generally speaking, like English and British things and look up to them and find them fascinating and weird and quirky. Or you need to have some huge sort of traumatic defeats. And neither has really been the case with England in the last 5.5 decades. So we just don't have the same emotional burden, if you will, going into this fixture.
So going back to that point you made about the Premier League, the Premier League may have increased the rivalry. Now, is that because of German players playing over here? Is that because of the sort of competitive academies and German Bundesliga clubs taking players from Premier League academies? Why has the Premier League increased the rivalry a little bit?
Well, I think two things have happened. First of all, the Premier League, of course, has enhanced or increased exposure of English football to Germans. It used to be this otherness, these weird people with no teeth and bleeding heads that would play once every few years. Now it's a much more familiar situation. We know the players. The Premier League is quite popular in Germany as far as a second league is concerned. And I think that there's been so many German coaches and players. In a way, it's reduced the rivalry in terms of the animosity that you might feel. It's much more difficult to dislike people who are actually there and they're enjoying themselves and they're playing well, or the Jurgen Klopp and the Thomas Tuchel. So the German thing is perhaps less abstract in that way, and vice versa. But at the same time, I think the Premier League is seen as a danger to lots of German teams and to German football, because it does have this gravitational pull on talent and sucks up players and coaches, and increasingly maybe even administrators behind the scenes, good journalists as well, and me. And I think the last thing that Germans always had, or from a football point of view, in terms of banter, if you will, or I hate the terms, but I can't even think of anything else at the moment, the bragging rights, was the success of the national team. That was the last bulwark against English dominance. And my sense is if that were to crumble, if England now finally as a team catch up with all the results and the brilliance of the Premier League, then you might be in a situation where Germany will be sort of the junior partner to this rivalry, the way that a lot of countries or at club level people look at the Premier League as this sort of this juggernaut that is a little bit overpowering. And I think at that moment, you might have a different kind of relationship in Germany emerging, where people be a lot more envious, and envy then easily turns into dislike and that kind of stuff. But it hasn't happened yet. It could happen if we'd see pronounced success from the English team.
I wonder if I'd have if I hadn't have dropped German after I'd done my A level in it and continued it at university, whether I could have then gone to Germany and been the Raphael Honigstein in Germany.
I'm sure.
And that journalistic talent would have been swapped, Raph.
But there's a serious point here, and I think it's worth making. I mean, England has been, for all this idea that it's very insular and and a little bit backward and stuff, has actually been tremendously open when it comes to getting football ideas, football people in, but also I don't think that a German media landscape or the German media would have been able to provide the kind of opportunities that I've enjoyed here as a foreigner. And I think that's
really interesting. That's really interesting that our game is seen as a more progressive, open, inclusive sport.
I don't know if I want to go that far, but just from a purely sort of professional standpoint, the opportunities that you get working in English in England, I think, are just so much bigger than doing the equivalent in Germany in German. And there is maybe some sort of equivalence to football there, that what happens in the Premier League echoes bigger because the narrative is more easily followed. You know, when you work with German people or with English people who write about the Bundesliga, I think they have a harder time. We have a harder time telling our stories because everything is translated. It's through the prism of the media, if you will, whereas it's much easier to tune into the stories that are constantly being churned out by these big brands, big clubs, when the language is your own, or at least one that you're very familiar with.
Just a final one on the football then, going back to that. If Gareth Southgate gave you a ring and said, who should we be paying most attention to in this Germany squad, who would it be?
I don't think I have a good answer for that, because there isn't that one player that has stood out for Germany. In fact, that's been always our greatest strengths, in a way, that we haven't had a team that relies on one or two players. That's been sort of the system of other nations, or they've pinned their hopes on particular players and then they were disappointed. Germany's big strength has been to turn up as a collective, to negate the strengths of the opposition, to play on the strengths that they have, solve their problems through just being better prepared, being a little bit better coached. I'm not sure we have all these advantages at this time around. There is a great hope, I think, in Germany that the introduction of Leon Goretzka will make a big difference to this Germany team. I share that hope, but at the same time, I made a point in the piece I wrote today in The Athletic that kind of pinning your hope on this one sort of all-action midfielder is going to do everything for you. He's going to win the battles at the back. He's going to build the play. He's going to score the goals, is a little bit indicative of where we are, you know, because it is actually not the sign of a functioning team when you think, oh, this guy who hasn't played, now he's going to deliver us. He's going to be our Steven Gerrard. It's not really the way that German football has worked over the last, I'd say, 15 years. It's almost a throwback to earlier times when people would think, oh, you know, we need Michael Ballack to help us, or we need Lothar Matthäus to help us, or we need Matthias Sammer to help us, or we need Stefan Effenberg to perform for us. This kind of, you know, this fixation on this one player that's going to do for you, I think symbolizes where Germany are as a team, which is not really a team right now.
Hello, I'm David Ornstein, and I'm here to tell you what The Athletic has planned across its podcast network during the Euros. You can catch me alongside Mark Chapman and a range of other Athletic writers on The England Show throughout the tournament, bringing you the very latest news and insight from the England camp every single day. Prior to the big kickoff, we're releasing an 8-part documentary series telling the stories of the past 8 tournaments, starting with the sounds and smells of Euro 88 and finishing in 2016. There'll also be nightly episodes of the Totally Football Show, 9 zonal marking podcasts from Michael Cox's tactics and analytics team, and Adam Hurrey's Football Clichés will take a look at the competition's alternative storylines. So, with what felt like a never-ending domestic season finally behind us, we've got all of your Euro 2020 needs covered. Check out every show for free wherever you get your podcasts.